My name is Orest. I'm Solutions Engineer here at Starwind, and today I'm going to host the webinar dedicated to the management of the vSphere environment with PowerShell. Now, before we begin the actual talking, let's take a quick look at today's agenda. So, first of all, we're going to talk about the vSphere management challenges that system administrators typically face. We're gonna talk how you can interact with vSphere using PowerShell. Of course, we're going to touch what you can automate with PowerShell in vSphere environment. And I'll show you also the technical demo and several not exactly ready scripts, more the approach and the commands that potentially allow you to provide useful scripts and manage the vSphere environment. And of course, in the end, we'll have some short time for the Q&A session. So, stepping into our today's topic, it should be noted that most of system administrators have to face some complicated tasks that require a lot of time, effort, and preparation. Something extraordinary, if you will, such as migrating workloads to a new hardware, expanding the existing clusters, and so on. However, these do not happen on a daily basis. Instead, the typical daily routines might take most of your working time, and this can be the deployment or modification of the existing VMs, their cloning, taking their snapshots, and other tasks. Now, sure, this is something you get used to, and in a small environment with several VMs and quite a few servers, this is not something you would actually care about. However, in large infrastructures composed of numerous clusters and combining multiple servers and hundreds of VMs, these actual simple tasks can take a great deal of your time, simply requiring too many clicks and dialog boxes. And that time could actually be spent on some more important and more useful tasks. So how can we interact with vSphere using the PowerShell? So to effectively deal with these simple but time-consuming routines, you would like to, first of all, implement at least some sort of automation. And that's actually where PowerShell comes in handy. Since I believe it's not an entirely new tool for you, I'm not actually gonna waste your time on taking the history dip and describing what it is and where it came from. So let's basically actually look what we need for PowerShell to work with vSphere. So first of all, you'll need one of the latest PowerShell versions installed on your machine. According to the vSphere documentation, this should be at least PowerShell 3 or 4, or of course higher, which is preferred to make sure there will be minimum, if no, compatibility issues. And this should be installed on your machine. This of course can be Windows, Linux, or Mac operating system. And the VMware PowerCLI module, which basically is a PowerShell-based command line interface for managing VMware vSphere, and which actually allows us connecting and managing that vSphere environment. Now, I just want to note that VMware has quite a solid PowerShell reference with over 700 commandlets and along with quite a good documentation and samples, which is basically all you need to have to start working with PowerShell and automate your daily routines. So with PowerShell, for example, you can basically automate, if not all, then probably most of your daily tasks. For example, run scheduled tasks, combine multiple tasks in a single script, trigger specific scripts on demand or on event. However, while this all indeed brings a great deal of automation, there are a few cons regarding the PowerShell, and pretty much this can be actually described as one single con, which means that you require some at least basic scripting skills, and PowerShell knowledge. So of course, this is not something, if you don't have the experience with PowerShell, you can just jump straight into it and fully automate all your typical daily tasks. So of course, you'll need to spend some amount of time just getting used to it, understanding the logic, and of course, finally, writing your own scripts that will be used in your environment. So what we can actually automate, as I said, pretty much everything. And also just wanted to note that however the PowerShell indeed requires scripting skills, so today you can find quite a handful of useful scripts shared over the web that this requirement in PowerShell experience and knowledge becomes less crucial. You can find various PowerShell scripts sysadministrators use on various forums and basically just modify them to your specific vSphere environment. And now let's take a look what we can do with PowerShell. As I mentioned, you can automate most of your daily routines. For example, you can easily automate the VM creation by running a dedicated script for it. You can further convert that VM to a template or clone this VM. So instead of numerous clicks and dialog boxes, you simply need to run a required script and just wait for it to finish, saving a great deal of your time. Of course, this list and what we are talking about today and what I'm going to cover on our technical stand, this is not limited to the options we talked about. Of course, there are much more implementations of this, just as well as PowerShell is not limited to individual servers or VMs, and you can manage also the vCenter cluster as well. For example, you can run scheduled tasks to put ESXi nodes into the main tenants, move the VMs between them, create a new cluster and a nodes to it, and so on and so on. And also you can manage, of course, the storage and compute resources allocation among the VMs using PowerShell. And so this is more of the technical topic. Let's actually jump to our demo stand and I will show you those commands that I have prepared and how we can use them. So here we have pretty much simple environment. It's the single standalone ESXi node just joined to the vCenter. So what we need to do and what basically actions we can perform with the PowerShell. So first, let me open the PowerShell ISC. That's basically the tool where you can test, where you can modify or debug the scripts you are using and the commands as well. And third thing you would actually need to do, as I mentioned, is to download and install the PowerShell and VMware PowerCLI module. However, I've already have this configured. I'm using in my current setup the PowerShell 5.1 version and PowerCLI 11.5. Now, as you can see, the first command I have is to import PowerCLI module to basically start our operation. However, since the PowerShell version 3, you do not necessarily need to import PowerCLI module every time you start the session. Basically, by running the command-let from the module, it automatically should import one, but just to showcase this, that's also an option to go. Now, the other thing we can do is to set the server IP addresses, the login, and the password to which we want to connect to, and always use them depending on the variables in our commands, or we can simply connect to the VI server using its dedicated IP. And since sharing the password to our demo stand is something that we are actually not allowed, So for the first step, I'm just gonna connect to our ESXi server by using its IP address. So it's gonna ask me for the username and for the password. Hope I remember this correct. And yeah, so we are connected. The ESXi IP address, port, and the username. Now, for the first thing I want to show you is how to create a simple virtual machine from the PowerShell. As you can see in our demo stand, we have no virtual machines yet, so it's quite just a simple, basic ESXi node. So let's get back to PowerShell. And so what we're going to do, we're going to create the new virtual machine, Starwind Webinar Test 01. We'll choose the data store for the local DS standalone. We're going to set the disk for 8 GB and memory for 1 GB. We also specify here the storage format for thin provisioned. This is not actually required, and there are a lot of other features and configurations you can set with PowerShell during its creation. But just to start and just to show you, let's run it. So we can see our percentage, it's completed successfully. And if we check our ESXi node, we're going to see the new Starwind Webinar Test 01 virtual machine. Well, so far so good. And let's, for example, try adding more RAM to it. If we check its current settings, this is 1 GB. And let's actually increase it. So we get our virtual machine by its name and set the VM memory for GB up to 2 GB. We also use the pipeline, since if using these comments separately, it simply might not work. And yes, I would like to do so. And let's check our virtual machine once again. And you can see that we have successfully extended our RAM size. Now, the next thing I wanted to show you is how to clone the virtual machine and to create a template of it. However, I so far have not found the straightforward and a simple way to do it. So as you can see, the cloning process will actually be comprised of quite a few commands. So the first thing I'm doing, I'm just gonna set the data store. Then, as you can see, I'm gonna use the Microsoft native PowerShell commands. These are not the PowerCLI commands actually. So since I have not found the actually straightforward way to clone and convert the VM, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to mount the folder inside the Starwind data store. Then I'm going to use it to copy our VMDK from the VM to it, then create a new VM and attach the VMDK. So let's basically do this. And we're gonna create our testing folder. And if we check our ESXi node. So you can see we've got our test clone folder. It's currently empty. The folder above, just in case, just contains our first created virtual machine. So let's get back. This command to remove the mount is actually unnecessary, but just to remove it from my local machine, the mount point, I'm just going to remove the PS drive. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to once again address to our first created VM test01, get its hard disk, copy it to the destination path and to the clone folder. And this has been completed, so we should see our VMDK. Yep, there it is. Now, if we go back, what next I'm going to do, I'm just going to create the new virtual machine test01 clone in the default data store with 2 GB of RAM, but as you probably noticed, with no VMDK assigned. That's why I'm going to just attach the previously copied VMDK. And once again, we have this task completed. Let's check our new virtual machine. There it is. Also, one thing I noticed, even though I did not specify the actual VMDK for it, it still creates the default 4 GB VMDK disk. And now let's actually attach the disk we have previously copied to our new clone virtual machine. And let's check the result. And yep, we can see our attached VMDK. Okay. Now let's disconnect from our ESXi node. I'm just using force and confirm to false for confirmation. I use force because if we just disconnect from the VI server, it will close the latest connection. So just in case, I'm using the force option. Now, what I'm going to do next is to actually create the new template based on our created and configured virtual machine, basically the test01 clone. And for this, we would need to connect to our vCenter. So let's do it. And once again, okay, connected to the vCenter. So we already have the folder created, just remember our temp for our templates. So it's currently empty. And now if we go and execute our final command, basically to create the new template of the virtual machine and assign the name VM template and the location for the webinar temp, we should see the newly created template in the vSphere web client in the web temp folder. And here it is. So pretty much successful. That's the way I've came up with. I'm not saying that's the most optimal or that's the most proper way to do so. I believe there are more and more efficient ways to do this, more simple, but just yet that's what I've come up with just to demonstrate it. Still, there are the possibilities to manage the vSphere with PowerShell. And now let's actually do some other stuff. Let's try to migrate the virtual machine. I'm actually going to connect to our another demo stand. So I'm going to try to migrate this VM, since this demo stand has the shared storage between the two ESXi nodes provided from the Starwind HA. And what I'm just going to do is move the virtual machine, the Starwind demo gateway, from ESXi 01 to ESXi 02. So for this, once again, let's disconnect from our current vCenter and connect to the second one. Okay. And yep, connected. So let's grab our Starwind demo gateway VM, move it, and simply the destination, Starwind demo ESXi 02 Starwind local. Now let's actually take a look into the vSphere, and we should shortly notice this VM moved to the partner ESXi node. Yep. So we can see it has been successfully vMotioned to the ESXi 02. Now let me actually disconnect from this session, the server, and as the additional example of what PowerShell scripts we use in our environment. So once again, let me show you this demo stand. So we have two ESXi nodes, each running the Starwind storage controller virtual machine. In this case, it's Windows Server based. And if we connect to one of these VMs, and go to the C drive, you will see we have the rescan ESXi script configured here. So just as well, you can see that it first imports the PowerCLI module. It is set to ignore the invalid certificate and ignores for the confirmation, just as in the beginning of my PowerShell commands I mentioned that we set the ESXi host, user, and password values, and further use the set of commands first to connect to our ESXi host, which we have already set the IP address with the specific user and its password. Now, what the script basically does, it connects to the SCSI LANs it gets the StarWind iSCSI devices and sets the multipass policy to round robin by additionally setting the IO value for round robin to 1. So pretty much that's the script that is also triggered by the action, by the event. So if we go and take a look at the task scheduler and take a look at our library, you can see, do we have a task created? It has multiple triggers for the StarWind service events and executes the PowerShell script I have just showed you. So once again, there are quite a lot of possibilities for using the PowerShell in the vSphere environment, and these are not in any way limited to what I showed you today. The actual scripting, for example, the commands that we have seen today, can be used in the single script, which of course requires its certain logic, the configured dependencies and notifications. So there is virtually very small limits to what you can do with PowerShell, and basically these basic assumptions, these basic commands and simple script which we use for StarWind, that's what I actually wanted to show you. And we have some few minutes for the Q&A session, so if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try and answer them. I see the question: in the new VM commandlet, is it possible to set custom VM options, for example, enabling the SMBIOS reflect host option? I haven't checked this yet, so cannot unfortunately tell you the precise answer. Yeah, so PowerShell is pretty much something that can be hardly covered overall and all its aspects, because it's more of a matter of the individual commands and how to use them and in what combinations, what workarounds to find. So I believe this will be it for today. For everyone who would like, we could send the example scripts we used and the commands we used today. So you can write to our email from the StarWind we can find on the StarWind website. If you would like to get these command examples and how we use them, we'll be more than glad to share those with you. Yeah, so definitely we will send email with our examples, and also in case someone will be wondering, the record of this webinar will be available in a week or so. It will be published on our website, and of course you'll get the email notification when the record will be available. So at this point, I would like to thank you everyone for taking your time, for actually dedicating it to join our webinar. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you all for coming once again, and stay safe and good luck to everyone. See you in our next webinar. Goodbye.